Good morning, members. It's the appointed time and we have a quorum. I call the meeting to order. Shall we invite the administration to join us first?
Joseon.
Good morning. It's the same team, so I'll dispense with the introduction. Members, you'll find in front of you an attendance list. Item number 1, matters arising from previous meeting. It's in relation to a meeting on the 2nd of June 2015. There is a list of follow-up actions. Paper number CB bracket 1996/14-15 bracket 01. The administration is still preparing the written response and it's yet to come. So we'll wait for the next meeting. And then it's the clause-by-clause examination. In the next meeting, we have already started the clause-by-clause. And we'll continue with clause 8. That is Section 35 under Division 3. You will find it on page C627 and page 9 of the markup copy. Let's start with 5 minutes for each member. Of course, we will be flexible. So we're now at Section 35. Perhaps we will ask the administration to explain to us. And I know that the legal advisor has some questions to ask. Mr. Lai, Mr. Samson Lai, Assistant Director. This is Division 3. This is in relation to obligations of registered suppliers and sellers. At the beginning, we have explained that the operation targets upstream stakeholders. Manufacturers and importers, collectively called suppliers, will have collective obligations in this regard. And Section 35 is in relation to recycling label and receipt. We hope that the suppliers will provide recycling labels to downstream recipients, and then in the end the labels will be distributed to consumers. Section 35 is in relation to the distribution of such labels. Some stakeholders asked about the actual operation, whether the labels will have to be stuck onto the product themselves. The details will be specified in the regulation. So there is no actual operation provisions in the bill itself. Section 35 says that if the label is distributed, it will have to be provided under 35(2) so that consumers will know that the product is under the producer pays scheme. A receipt has to be provided with standard format stating that this is regulated under the bill, and there is a registered supplier paying the recycling fee, which is stipulated as well. The information is provided so that consumers will know that the price may have included the recycling fee. Bracket 3 is a technical provision. It says that entering into an agreement to distribute does not constitute distribution. Bracket 4 and bracket 6 refers to a subsection. The legal advisor has also mentioned about this. We are aware that there are some renovation works or construction of new buildings. Furniture and electrical appliance may be included. It is not the legislative intent to cover these. That's why we have the provision under bracket 4. And we have already explained this, and it's stated in a paper to the LegCo. Before you ask questions, I'd like to ask the legal advisor to state her views. Thank you. In 35 bracket 2, there is a premise. Let me read it out in English.
Equipments to a consumer. The seller must, in accordance with the REE regulation, provide to the consumer. 咁就有 A 同埋 B 兩個嘅條件，佢係需要符合嘅。
There are two conditions, A and B, and they have to be met. Members may recall that under bracket 2, the premise is that it will only target a particular seller. And if you refer to CB bracket 1919/1415 bracket 02, paragraph 5, the administration has responded to some provisions under section 37. The administration said that if there are registered suppliers distribute directly such products to consumers, the administration was talking about overseas consumers, and they were expounding on their policy concept. And they said that this may not be the main business of these suppliers, and these businesses may not be common, and the relevant regulation will be this and that. And I'd like to say that given bracket 2, it's limited to say only a certain seller will distribute the electrical equipment. It may not be common, but a registered supplier may still distribute certain electrical equipment. And there is, it is defined in section 2, including leasings, sale, and giving out as a gift in the course of business. Perhaps the administration would care to explain that if a registered supplier or seller, if they distribute the regulated electrical equipment, they have to meet both A and B, or is it the case that only when they're acting as a distributor, if they have distributed in accordance with the definition, then they will have to meet both A and B? Who is to take this question, Mr. Lai? We're aware that some suppliers will sell directly to consumers. Say, for example, Section 37, there is a circumstance under which there is direct sale, and the recycling fee has to be paid. Suppliers and retailers can be one and the same. So in direct selling, they have to meet 35(2) by providing the label and the receipt. Legal advisor. In that case, I understand that it's the view of the administration that they are one and the same. So it depends on which hat that person is wearing, whether it's a distributor or a seller. But if we're looking at CB bracket 1919, there are circumstances when a registered supplier or manufacturer would distribute. If that is the case, would there be an occasion when the capacity of supplier is used to directly distribute the REE to a target person? For this capacity of registered supplier, do they have to meet A and B? If that is the case, would the administration consider to make it clear that if it is a distributor or a registered supplier distribute REE to some person, then the conditions will have to be met? If that is the case, then the scope of the definition of seller is quite wide. If you supply or distribute an REE, you will have to meet A and B. You have to fulfill A and B. For the term seller, in the Section 31, there is a definition. As I explained, there are circumstances when the registered supplier, that is the company, also acts as a seller in direct selling. We've seen it in the market. And if that is the case, under 35(2), the two conditions will have to be met. That is the provision of the label and a receipt. There is actually no confusion, because there is no case that the registered supplier cannot, under any circumstance, be a seller.
Mr. Lai is saying that under 2A and B, a seller will have to provide label and receipt to a consumer. That is quite clear. But at the same time, in the same circumstance, if a supplier does provide products to consumers directly, then he will become a seller. So he will also have to comply with 2A and B. Is that what you mean? Legal advisor, would you like to propose any amendment to the text to clarify the issue? Mr. Lai has told us about the legislative intent. What do you think about the drafting? Thank you, Chairman. Now, if that's the case, then I would have some concern. We should look at the definitions of seller and supplier. Under the definition of supplier, it says that this person will carry on a business in the distribution of regulated equipment. Now, would this happen under the definition of supplier? Will he be able to say that I'm just a supplier? I act in the capacity as a supplier and I distribute REE to people I want to distribute to. So I wouldn't fall under the definition of seller. However, if you write it like this, if a seller distributes REE, then he will have to comply with conditions A and B. However, if the distributor states that he is not a seller as defined under the ordinance because he does not fit into the definition of a seller, because he doesn't carry on a business of distributing regulated electrical equipment. I just manufacture REE. Now, will this happen? If this possibility is not there, then it's fine. But if there is a slim opportunity for this happening, I'd like to see whether we can clarify the drafting. Can I defer to the law draftsman to explain? Because I cannot see how that can happen. It is quite clear in the bill that a supplier will carry on such business and he distributes the REE to certain targets, and under 35(2), when distribution is done, those are the conditions that have to be met. So I can't see how there is this loophole. I'd like to see whether DOJ would like to supplement. Mr. Mo? Chairman. Whether a supplier will fall under the definition of a seller, it is not for any person to say subjectively, because a seller means a person who carries on a business of distributing regulated electrical equipment to consumers. If there is controversy, the court can objectively decide whether somebody fits in with that definition. So a supplier, of course, will mainly deal in supplying and importing, but if he also directly sells REE to consumers, and if it is part of his business, then he will also fit the definition of seller under the bill. If that's the case, then 36(3)(ab) will apply. In other words, the supplier will also have to act in accordance with Section 36, said Mr. Mo. Now, my reading of Mr. Mo's explanation is that supplier or seller, they are not mutually exclusive, that these people can be one and the same person. If the act is as described in 35(2), then this person will have to comply with 35(2)(a) and (b). Is that right? Legal advisor, are you happy with the explanation? Do you still want some textual amendment? Thank you, Chairman. I have already stated the question for discussion. If the administration's policy is to leave it to the court, then I will just leave this with members. Okay. Members, you can comment. And after the meeting, officials can further consider the issue to see whether we need any textual clarification. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether my question has been asked before. I'd like to talk about the definition of supplier. Under B, this is an exemption. Does not include a person who only provides service for transporting the equipment that does not belong to the person into Hong Kong for another person. Now, reading this question comes to my mind. Now, we always shop online. It may be direct sales, but online shopping is even more prevalent. We visit overseas websites and then we put the order, and then the product would be shipped to Hong Kong. Sometimes the there may be a person who acts like an intermediary. It is a person, and then I will be collecting all these products from the shipment and then distribute them to people in Hong Kong. If I operate in that mode, who am I under the bill? What is my status? I order online from overseas websites. I may do it for myself. Then, of course, I don't need any labels. But very often, there are people who would collect all the shipment and then distribute them in Hong Kong. And who is this person? I think Mr. Wu is referring to Division 1, and that is the definition of supplier, B. Who can take the question, please? Well, here it says, but does not include blah, blah, blah. We are actually targeting logistics and shipping operators because when they bring products into Hong Kong, that might be regarded as importing. But this time around, we'd like to place the responsibility on importers, and that is why we have provided this exemption. If the product does not belong to a logistics company, he only helps to take the product into Hong Kong, then they will not be caught. Well, I understand about logistics companies. What about an individual? We shop online, and then I collect a lot of goods, and then I distribute them in Hong Kong. Well, he may be breaking the law, but how does that happen? Because I shop online and then I distribute the goods. Well, distributing under 31 is also defined. It would mean sell or lease the equipment. It is not the same as what the member is saying. It is not just distributing the goods. Well, maybe you have misunderstood me. Visit any MTR station. I may go to Shun Feng and I get a lot of products, and then at the gate of the MTR station, my clients would come and receive the goods. Well, would that amount to selling? That is exactly what I'm trying to clarify. Sorry, Mr. Wu. Please explain more clearly. You mean you shop online? You are not a registered supplier. You are just an individual. And then you distribute the products to other people, and it is actually an act of selling. Is that right? Yes, that is what I understand it to be. I have not seen people passing money to another, but my understanding is that this is a kind of distributing. So what is the legal responsibility of that person under the bill? Okay, I think we can narrow it down. So you shop online and then you sell the products. Because if you're only talking about a few friends shopping online and then you ask somebody to provide the address so you can collect all the goods and then you give them to your friends, then it is not a kind of direct selling. I think that's different. So let me narrow it down to shopping online and then selling the goods in Hong Kong. Actually, we have provided a paper describing different scenario, shopping online or bringing parallel goods into Hong Kong and then distributing them in Hong Kong. Well, if this is done in the course of business, then that person will fall under the definition of supplier. The source of the goods is not our concern, but the act of distributing. So when you see what happens at the MTR stations, you might want to send somebody there and ask that person whether he's selling the goods. Is that right? Well, in fact, if he is selling it, then he will come under the definition of supplier. Well, we understand normally selling is how people open shops and then they sell goods. But I'm talking about shopping online and then distributing the goods in Hong Kong. Mr. Lai, Well, yes, I was talking about parallel goods. Those would be included. And I dare not say whether indeed we are going to inspect MTR stations because it depends on the details of each operation. But whether or not the source of the goods is from online shopping or from the bringing of parallel goods into Hong Kong, as long as they distribute or sell in Hong Kong, then they will become suppliers under the bill and they will be regulated. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. This question might have been asked, but I'd like to seek further clarification. Wholesalers or manufacturers, they would supply goods to the Hong Kong market and then they would also sell overseas. But then they do so in the same office. When they have to pay the fee, how they will be charged? Is it that as long as this is sold through that office, it has to be charged? Or if documentation is used, do you only go by the invoices? This is something we are going to talk about under 37 and 38, where we talk about the filling out of forms and reporting. If some of the goods are for export, then in the annual audits, we will know which goods should be the subject of the paying of the recycling fee. Mr. Lam. Yes, I will have other questions on 37 and 38, but I'd like to clarify one point here. If they report to you and then you check the documents, is it that you are going to check every act of selling and every registered person? Is it that you are going to check every invoice, or are you only going to do random checking? Mr. Lai. Well, of course, it is not possible for us to check every invoice, so it's more like random checking. And then there is also another requirement that a practicing accountant has to do the audit. Now, if after auditing the sums are found to be reasonable, then that will be okay. Mr. Wu Chi-wai? Chairman, I still like to follow up on what I asked, and that is the definition of supplier. The AD said that, or DD said that under B, if a logistics company distributes the goods, that act of distributing would not be a contravention. But if you look at distributing, it says in relation to any regulated electrical equipment. Well, so this will become something which is about distributing, and C, transmit or deliver the equipment for any of the following activities: selling, leasing, and exchange or disposal for consideration.
So the logistics company collect the goods from, say, for example, group purchase or online purchase, and they charge a service charge. So when I distribute the products to my friends or these retailers, I am paid the transportation cost. So how is my conduct different from that of SF Express, Shunfeng Express? So it says that it is exchange or disposal for consideration. Mr. Wu says that this consideration is actually the transportation cost, and it meets 31B. So in a way, does it constitute a distribution? So when it says logistics, it says that it should be, well, it does not include the case when the equipment does not belong to that person, but if that person purchased the products and then sell it on, then he is a seller. So if you only charge a transportation cost, you receive the goods and then forward it to the actual buyer, then the equipment is not yours. So for companies that provides logistics service, will not fall under the scope of this bill. You have made it clear, Mr. Lai, if you're only providing logistics service and you only charge the transportation cost, then there is no sale of the REE. Yes, your intent is clear. But looking at the provision, it seems to fall under 31C3. That is, it's done for consideration. An exchange or disposal for consideration. And 31C, transmit or deliver the equipment for any of the following activities. 3 is an exchange or disposal for consideration. So it doesn't exclude the consideration for transporting the goods. I understand your observation. Under supplier, under B, we have excluded that, and the condition is whether the equipment belongs to that person. If it doesn't belong to that person, then you don't have to see whether it's distribution, because the product does not belong to that person. We will look into it. So that's one outstanding issue here now. Next is 35. Mr. Lai has explained 1 to 4, and we have asked some questions. The administration will look into whether there is any need for improvement of the text. 4. It's excluded equipment included in a residential property under an agreement for sale and purchase. Say, for example, the developer provides you with an aircon in the flat. It's not included in these sections. Mr. Wu, could you please clarify? Well, when the REE goes to the hand of the developer, was there any sale? Or is it the case that if it's directly procured by the developer and then put into a flat, then they can circumvent the payment of the recycling fee? Mr. Lai, it's not the case that it falls outside our scheme. If there are, say, refrigerators and aircons being purchased from overseas, in a certain chain in the upstream supply, we have already collected the recycling fee. The purpose of the recycling label and the receipt is to let the consumer know that the product has been included in the scheme. If selling a flat is considered distribution, then the scope will be too wide, because the suppliers will have to file a quarterly return. We have to take that out because this has already been included elsewhere. the supply chain can be quite long. If the net is cast too wide downstream, then a lot more people will be affected, and we have to make a choice. The developer may get the goods from a supplier and put these REEs in the flat. Do they have to pay a recycling fee and provide a label? When the flat is then sold to a customer, well, there is no extra charge collected in relation to the equipment inside the flat. So the developer does not have the duty to provide label and receipt to the small owners. Is that right? Will that be the case when the owner has to dispose of these REEs? Because of the absence of label, they cannot make use of the system to dispose of the equipment. We've explained in previous meetings that the label is to distinguish the products, that it falls under the scheme, and when it's collected, apart from the removal service plan, there are also some other services provided by the contractors. So even if you lose the recycling label, it won't affect recycling. If the labels can be provided to the flat owner, then there will be more flexibility. It seems from 35.4 that there is no duty for the developer to provide that, but actually developers have purchased the goods from sellers, and that is not necessarily the case. Whether there is a label or not is not of paramount importance, because if you use the equipment for a number of years, you may lose the label, or the label may get damaged anyway, so not much importance is attached to the label. But when the consumer purchased the equipment, it would be ideal to let the consumer know that it is included in the scheme. But this label is not of paramount importance. Mr. Wu, I agree that there should not be repeated collection or double charging. But if there are no provisions to elaborate that, let me try to explain to you. I'm a developer. I can directly import the equipment, fridges, aircons, have them installed in the flats that I've built without having to register and without having to pay the fees. Would that be the case? Of course, whether it's actually done is a separate matter. But if it's not made clear in the law, say for example requiring developers to get the goods from sellers, if there is a direct import, then developers will not be included under the scheme. If it's not clarified, that means developers are allowed to directly import the equipment and have them installed in the flats without having to pay anything. So, with bulk purchase, developers can indeed import the goods themselves. And under 35(4), the developer does not have the duty to provide receipts or labels. It seems to be a loophole. A large amount of equipment is imported into Hong Kong for use in Hong Kong, but they are not regulated. Is that the case, Mr. Lai? Say there is a developer which import the goods under 37. If it is for if it is used, the fees will have to be collected, even if it's installed in their own residential development. So they are still included in our scheme. And if that is the case, they have to register and they have to file quarterly returns. It's a rather cumbersome administrative procedure. So the developer will have to choose whether to go through this cumbersome procedure or make use of an intermediary that's already a registered party. So it will not be the case that by importing the goods directly, they can be outside our scheme. So even if they import the goods directly, they still have to pay the recycling fees. That's the explanation of Mr. Lai. They are interrelated. I think the administration will have to reduce it in writing. It seems to me that the developer can actually do it. I'm not saying that they will do it, but it seems that there is a loophole here. I think it will be better if it is made clear in writing. Mr. Lai has already explained 37 B3. It says that the developer uses the equipment for the first time, so it's not distribution but use. They have purchased the product, and by installing is actually using the product for the first time, right?
I agree. Actually, under the definition of use, it is a display of the REE for the sake of selling. So this is also regulated. But I believe our discussion has sparked a concern. And that is, with the rolling out of this bill or ordinance, consumers may be very concerned whether there is a label on the REE. But just now you said that this doesn't mean that products without a label cannot be disposed of. How can consumers dispose of REEs, and how is an REE different if there is a label or otherwise? I think later on, when the bill comes into effect, you have to lay out all these administrative details, and I believe you have to mount sufficient publicity for the sake of consumers. We understand the legislative intent here, but I myself am concerned that consumers may be confused. They may ask, the developer gives me so many pieces of REE in this unit, but I'm not given the labels. Does it mean that I cannot dispose of these REE in future? I think they will ask these questions. And also, Mr. Wu asked these questions, and I believe you will give written replies later. Chairman, can I further seek clarification on label. If I may refer back to 35. If a supplier engages in retail, the supplier should have stuck the label on the REE. Under 1, if wholesaling is done, then the label should be stuck there already. At the retail level, theoretically, now there may be parallel import. Then apart from registration and labeling, on the retail level, you will have to issue a receipt for every piece of REE. Is that correct? Talking about developers, when they get REEs from manufacturers and hang the REE on the walls, they should already bear a label. When disposal is required, my understanding is that whether or not there is a label, disposal will not be affected. Supposing I'm a property buyer and I'm talking about first-hand property. Well, maybe the label might fall off REEs if you buy second-hand property, but I'm just asking whether if I buy first-hand property, the REEs should all bear a label. Chairman, let me start with one step backward. We don't require the sticking of the label because the trade has told us that there may be difficulties. They will provide the label and it may be up to the consumer to stick the label on the REE. The member is correct. If you get the REE from a registered supplier, then there should be a label coming in with the REE. Whether or not it's stuck on the REE, it doesn't matter. And that is not in contravention to the law. The developer, if he imports the REE himself for his own use, this will not be covered by 35(1). And this may happen. But under 36, the developer will be able to get the labels and the two are not in conflict. But under the bill, if a developer provides REEs together with the unit, it will not be regarded as an act of distribution. Sorry, I'm still not clear. Mr. Lai said if a developer imports REE directly, and he said for his own use, so he may not need the label. But under 37, it says if it is used for the first time, then the supplier must be a registered supplier or a registered user of the REE. In fact, I was already clear, but then I'm now confused. Mr. Lai, if the developer imports the REE, then would he become a supplier, so he needs to be registered? Well, yes. In that case, a developer has to be registered, and he will have to pay the recycling fee. But the member was asking about the legal responsibility about the label, and it is premised on whether it is an act of distribution. The developer has to pay the fee because it is for his own use, not because he distributes the REE. But the law does not require the provision of a label. I think we have spent a lot of time on the issue, and I believe all the clarifications have been sought. Let me just mention, talking about sticking of the label on the REE, my understanding is that up to this moment, there is no provision about the display of the label. According to Mr. Lai, as long as it is provided to the consumer, if the consumer wants to stick it on the REE or if the consumer likes to keep it together with the warranty papers, there is no particular requirement on this one. Intuitively, you may think that the label should be on the REE. And if a unit is sold together with the REE, then still the consumer may not be able to see the labels on the REE because there is no requirement on this. Mr. Lai, I think this is what you are trying to say. So there is no requirement for the label to be stuck on the REE. Right. Let's carry on. Sorry, Ms. Sitho. I'm sorry, I'm late. I'd like to ask a question. Maybe this is covered already, but I'll be brief. If a developer places REE in a new unit, is that an act of distribution? Well, actually, we spent a lot of time on this one, and it has been clarified. Because 35(4) says that it does not constitute distributing the equipment. We actually spent quite some time on this point. Okay, if this does not constitute distributing the equipment, what happens? But if the developer imports the REE or buys from the supplier, and then the REE is installed in the unit, then it will become using the REE for the first time. So the developer has to pay the recycling fee. In other words, the law also regulates this act. In other words, the developer will be the person using the REE for the first time. Yes, and as you said, Chairman, when the unit is sold, the property buyer does not have to pay the recycling fee. But what about the use of the label? Well, we have already explained that basically there is no responsibility to provide the label. But as I said, it may be better if it is provided, and as Mr. Lai was trying to explain, whether or not there is a label, there is no effect on the future disposal of the REE. Okay, so this links up with what you said. When the law comes into effect, there should be sufficient publicity made for the sake of the public. Yes, this is my proposal because of that discussion. Okay, Ms. Sitho, you're really smart. You were not here when we discussed it, but then you were very smart in grasping the gist of the discussion. Sorry, there was a vehicle that broke down on the road when I was coming here. 35, 5, and 6. Mr. Lai, I think we already mentioned this. Subclause 5 is an offense provision, a fine at level 5, and number 6, a definition of tenant vis-a-vis service apartments and developers. This is a technical construction. Mr. Lai, can you please remind us what is a fine at level 5? $100,000. Okay. Legal advisor, any views from you? Then let us come to 36. Mr. Lai, please. Chairman, this is about the provision of labels. There will be two situations. Number one, a registered supplier will fill in a form of the EPD and applies to the director of EPD for the recycling labels. 36.2, the director has a discretion. He can consider the need for the supplier to be seeking labels. If the number is excessively large, he can refuse the application. Since these labels have no monetary value, we will try to facilitate suppliers who will just have to fill in forms and the labels will be supplied. Number 4, since the label is not stuck on the REE, we expect that the label may be lost within the supply chain, and then the REE may not be distributed anymore. So there is a mechanism saying that if people would like to buy the labels, the director can use his discretion and supply the labels. Legal advisor, you have a question. Yes, Chairman. I'd like the administration to clarify 2 points about 36. 36(3)(b). The condition is for the person to pay to the director a recycling fee that is appropriate for the labels. And then the director must, subject to subsection 4, provide those labels to the person. I can see that there is a definition on recycling fee. It says, means the fees prescribed for the purposes of this part by the REE regulation. The word fee is in the plural. So under 36(3)(b), the recycling fee, is that a different one from that in 37? Because one is for getting the labels. Let us call it X. And then if a recycling fee is to be paid for an REE, it may be Y. No, we are talking about the same amount. Say if it is $100 for a TV set under 37, then it will also be $100 under 36. The two recycling fees should be for the same amount. Legal advisor, then can I understand it to mean that under 36, when a person applies for a label, then that person would have already paid the recycling fee for the REE because the two are of the same amount? No. No, here if a person, and this person is not about any particular individual, then I'm really confused. If I'm that person, I am a registered supplier, and I like to apply to the director for a stack of recycling labels. According to 36(3)(b), I will have to pay to the director for the labels. How much money should I pay the director before I can get the labels? Chairman, suppliers should get the labels under 36(1), so he doesn't have to pay the money, and then under 37 and 38, they will have to submit quarterly reports and then pay in batches. But we expect that in the operation, some labels may be lost in the supply chain. If they want to buy back some labels, then they can do so under 36(3). This person may be a seller, or some people on the supply chain who are non-suppliers. So to respond to the LA, I cannot say that this person will be the one who has already paid the recycling fee. Chairman, please allow me to ask further questions. Under 36(3)(b), the premise is a person. So this person can be a supplier or not a registered supplier. My first point for clarification is if coincidentally I'm a registered supplier, so I'm a person, and I like to apply to the director for 500 recycling labels so I can distribute the REE and provide the labels to target people, maybe consumers. So does it mean that at that stage I would have already paid the director? If yes, does it mean that that would already be the fee that I should pay under 37? Should that be the same amount?
Well, in the scenario outlined by the legal advisor, we will reject the request under 36(4) because if it is normal distribution, then under 36 bracket 1 should be followed. They should fill in a form and ask us for the labels free of charge, but they have to submit returns. They should not follow 36 bracket 3 because they are there to catch those that have not followed the normal procedure. Ms. Sit-Ho, I would like to follow up on the point raised by the legal advisor. For Section 36, apart from the director, there are other 3 types of people. Bracket 1, registered supplier. Bracket 3, a person. Bracket 4, any person. So you have used 3 different terms to refer to the same group of person or 3 different groups of person. If they are all registered suppliers, can you specify that if, under bracket 3, if a registered supplier and use the same term for bracket 4, that is, the director may set a limit on the number of labels that may be provided to a registered supplier. Because if you use if you use different terms, I may think maybe they are different groups of people. Well, for this bracket 3, it may not be a registered supplier if some equipments have already been distributed, so they have entered the supply chain and the labels have gone missing, and we have to identify the source, and if we require the first supplier to purchase the label, it will be unreasonable, but we cannot be sure where the products are. So for bracket 3, it says a person. So as long as someone pays the recycling fee that is appropriate for the labels will be provided again. And back to the scenario outlined by the legal advisor. If it's a normal sale and purchase by a supplier, when the form is filled, labels will be provided for free for the course of normal business, and then returns will be submitted and the recycling fees will be paid. For bracket 3, it caters for situations when the labels have gone missing. Ms. Ho? Well, 36(1) is quite simple. It's just say that you have to fill in a specified form, and we don't have the specified form with us, so we don't know what information will be asked for. Say, for example, that the first-hand supplier should pay the fees. Our concern is that as long as a form is filled in, you will just give them however many they want, 300, 500. So we would like to see the specified form so that we know what information you request. Before it reaches retail, there are many tiers. These people can fill in the forms. So if there are 300 labels and there are 3 tiers and all of them file the form, then we're talking about 1,200 labels. The system should be easy for the sector. So for bracket 1, it's for registered supplier because in the distribution of the REE, registered suppliers have the duty to pay the recycling fee. So it's not the case that we'll give the labels to anyone who fill in the forms. And registered suppliers will submit quarterly returns. And we have the power to limit the number of labels distributed. But brackets 1 and 2 are to facilitate course of business, so that there will be label supply for equipment. But we have to cater for situations when the labels are lost. So we have brackets 3 and 4 to deal with the situation. But what about the procedures under brackets 3 and 4? Mr. Lai, please explain. When a label is issued in place of a missing one, how much is the recycling fee that is appropriate? It's just a reissue of the label, or the same amount as the original recycling fee. It's the original recycling fee, not a service charge. That means there will be a double charge. Legal advisor, I would like to follow up on the point made by Mr. Lai. If you refer to 36 and 37, 37 specified certain conditions that a fee has to be paid, and under 37 bracket 2 it says that is payable only once in respect of any REE. But according to what Mr. Lai said, he said that is the original recycling fee. So does it mean that there is a chance that for the same equipment, the registered supplier has already paid, and then the user will have to pay the recycling fee when the label is lost? So where can we see that when there is a reissue of a missing label, then the fee has to be paid? Back to my example, if the consumer for some reason lost the label, we understand that without the label it will not affect the disposal of the equipment. But I'd like the administration to give us the information on the provision. 1. Where can we see that for 36 it is a reissue of a missing label? That is, normally the supply will have to follow 37, and it's only when the label is missing that 36 will be triggered. And 2. If the two amounts are the same, then does it mean that the recycling fee is paid more than once? The recycling fee, as defined, means
多過一類嘅再造費，可能有一
I've always thought that there is more than one type of fees. Say, for example, one is for the issuance of the recycling label and some other fees. But there may be a WEETRF or other situations when a larger amount will be charged. That's what I thought. That's why I asked question whether the two recycling fees would be the same and whether it's in relation to the same equipment. But according to Mr. Lai, he said that it would be the same amount on the same REE. It's not the case that the label will attract a different fee. So, in relation to the questions asked, please give us further information. My understanding is that the recycling fee will have to be paid, and then you will get a label free of charge if you are a registered supplier. There are a number of related questions, but I'd like to add my own. 36 bracket 3 is a reissuance of a missing one. And if a recycling fee will have to pay again, then who will be silly enough to ask for a reissuance? Because as you've explained, that without the label, it doesn't mean that the equipment cannot be disposed of. Are you referring to a resale? And if the person is not the user but the supplier, and if for some reason the labels have gone missing and they ask for reissuance, and if you ask them to pay a recycling fee, it seems to be unreasonable because it won't be a reissuance anymore. So can you explain to us, Mr. Lai? Perhaps we will supply the information in paper, but I'd like to say that in the design of the scheme, there are restrictions. We don't have a tracking system or tracking mechanism. We can't say that, well, a supplier has already paid the recycling fee and sometime later some other person or say a retailer has lost the label and we can track it down and reissue the label. And if it's not an equal amount, there is a loophole. Someone may come up to say that, well, we want a reissuance and pay a smaller fee. So these are the constraints. So under 36 bracket 3b, if the recycling fee is different, say it's one amount for the new product and a different one for reissuance, that will be a problem. Following on a point of Mr. Lai's, that it's very difficult for them to track from the supply chain how much and who has paid. But what if there is an invoice? And on the invoice it says that say, for example, label has been given to the retailer. The supplier may say on the invoice, a label has already been provided to the consumer. And the consumer can take the invoice to the government and say that, look, a label has already been issued and because of my carelessness, it's missing. So there is a way for you to trace it. And in this case, you can avoid the circumstance when you double charge. And it will avoid a lot of confusions. Perhaps the administration can supply us the information afterwards. So under the policy, under Section 36, is a reissuance. Of a label in relation to an REE, but I can't see that by looking at 36 that it is a reissuance. Perhaps the administration can reflect the legislative intent and the policy intent, not necessarily in Section 36, but somewhere else, so that at least we will know. Otherwise, if it says if a person, it can be a body corporate, a natural person, distributor, consumer, as long as you are willing to pay. A label will be issued. I'm concerned is that it may be vague or confusing.
我相信呢個問題真係都幾複雜。
I believe this is quite complicated. I'd like to propose that the administration go back and give it some detailed consideration and then give us a detailed reply in writing. Mr. Lai, perhaps you can make use of different scenarios to explain in what circumstance you will ask for a replacement. As a consumer, I don't think I need a replacement of the label because it has no effect on the disposal of the REE. I shouldn't be making myself pay a second time. So under what circumstances would there need to be a replacement of the label? And also, if there is sufficient reason, should the replacement be allowed without the paying of a full recycling fee? Because when we usually think about replacement, you shouldn't be asked to pay the original fee because you can provide certification that originally a fee has been paid already. Ms. Sit-Ho and then Mr. Wu Chi-wai. A very brief one. I believe the administration should give us back a paper to explain in detail. I will now just ask follow-up questions so they can include them in the paper. Mr. Lai said it's very difficult to track. However, the goods must have been transacted on the basis of receipts and invoices. I mean, unless it's smuggled into Hong Kong or else, there must have been proper transactions. And I can't imagine why you say it's difficult to track the goods. Also, the disposal fee is not that cheap. It is $150 to $200, and it will be $10,000 if it's about 20 pieces of REE. If a batch of labels has been lost, I think it is must be of a big amount. You know, if we lose our ID card, first of all, we need to report to the police. We have to give a statement, and then we apply for a replacement by paying a replacement fee. But if it's found that you have actually sold your ID to another person, then you would be committing another offense. I think the administration has to let us know the different scenarios and circumstances before we can evaluate whether you have drafted your clauses carefully and whether they are too stringent or unnecessary. Therefore, I need the administration to let us know the background to Section 36 and the scenarios they have in mind. And also, I can also ask another question. This has something to do with the design of the label. If the label requires the filling in of the model and the model number and serial number. Now, if that's the case, then you can always trace the goods. But if the label is just to prove that the recycling fee has been paid, then it would be of a different design. I think we need to know all these technical details. Mr. Wu Chi-wai, you can ask the question first, and then I'll give the floor to the LA. I am also asking a follow-up question. My understanding is under 1 and 2, you fill out a specified form, which is quite simple, but 3 is about a person. Mr. Lai, can I ask you to clarify, when a person makes the application, if he applies for 1, well, I can understand. Maybe a retailer has lost 1 label, but why would he be applying for 5 or 10 replacement labels? Will that person have to fill in relevant forms to say where the original labels have gone and what use the replacement labels will be for, so that you can do some auditing? Because I can't imagine why people have to apply for a big batch of replacement labels. Who on the supply chain will have to do that? And when they do so, do they have to fill out information for the sake of auditing? Mr. Lai, let us give you a detailed paper to explain this. But overall speaking, 3 and 4 are for the sake of trade facilitation. Our intent is to charge the original fee, and therefore we think people would not be frivolous in applying for replacement labels. And the assumption is that when this person comes along, he must have a real need. So he comes along to buy the recycling labels. That is why the process will not be protracted. If this person is willing to pay the original fee, then he can buy the labels. But we can give a written reply to answer all these questions. Just one more point. If I am a supplier under 1 or 2, and for some reason I lose the labels, and I come to apply for you from you the labels again, does it mean I have to pay a fee? Well, yes, if you lose the labels, because we would have already given you the labels under 1. and this is the system for the labels to be distributed downstream. But if suddenly you lose the labels and there is a batch of REEs without labels, and under 3 and 4, we will allow you to pay a fee and then you can come back to the original system. So that means this person under 3 and 4 should actually mean registered suppliers and retailers. Well, Chairman, relevant people on the supply chain, I have already proposed to Mr. Lai that he can describe different scenarios so we understand who this person is and their considerations about the actual operation of this clause. Legal advisor. I have a question on the drafting in Chinese. 36(1). It says, if a registered supplier applies to the director in a form specified by the director for recycling labels of a particular class, the director must, subject to subsection 2, provide those labels to the supplier. I'd like to ask the administration to explain one thing first. How many classes of recycling labels there are? Or do you mean a particular class of REE? So is the particular class being applied to the labels or to the REEs? Mr. Lai, I don't know whether I understand your question, but in actual operation, as we mentioned in the past, there are 8 types of REE, and we attach a fee to each one. And there is also a label for each. Therefore, there will be different particular classes of REE. If it is a TV set, then there will be a label for a TV. We still have some time. Let us carry on with 37. Chairman, we mentioned in the last meeting the responsibility for paying the recycling fee, 37(1), that it is upon the registered supplier. Now, what fees would have to be paid by the registered supplier under 1A? It talks about an equipment manufactured in Hong Kong by the supplier, or the equipment is caused to be imported into Hong Kong by the supplier. The member just asked about logistics companies, and this is where such companies are taken care of. Under B, it says that if the supplier distributes the equipment to a consumer or distributes it for further distribution in Hong Kong, or uses the equipment for the first time, then the supplier will have to pay the recycling fee. And all these 3 scenarios have been discussed in different meetings, and we mentioned last time that if it is direct sales, we were asked whether there could be some change to the drafting. We're still considering it. And under 2, we have said that in principle, the recycling fee is charged only once. And number 3, if there is default, we can try to recover it through civil proceedings. Ms. Sitho? There are 2 sources. One, which is manufactured in Hong Kong, and 2, which is imported into Hong Kong. At the next meeting, I'd like the administration to let us know how you cooperate with the Customs and Excise about the importing of REE, because you have to know how much REE is imported into Hong Kong before you know if somebody has evaded the paying of the recycling fee, or like 36 people would evade the paying of the fee by saying they have lost something, so they get back the labels. I understand this is what 36 is trying to avoid. So first of all, how do you work in liaison with the Customs and Excise? Because there must be import papers when the REE are brought into Hong Kong, so that you know on a quarterly basis how much recycling fee the importer should pay the government. Number 2, manufactured in Hong Kong, does it mean really made in Hong Kong? If that's the case, how do we know how many pieces of REE have been made in Hong Kong? I understand Hong Kong does not manufacture large pieces of REE, but later on you may add to the types of REEs, and well, maybe the Hong Kong economy will be diversified and Hong Kong's manufacturing sector may come back. Then how will you be able to verify the number of REEs manufactured in Hong Kong and whether that is aligned with the number of labels? I think these questions also have to do with 38 and 39, which have to do with the submitting of annual audit report and also reporting by registered suppliers. And it is not just the customs and excise which will be involved, because as an operator, suppliers have different legal responsibilities in submitting returns and audited reports. Mr. Lai, it is almost time. Would you like to say something now? Yes, briefly, Chairman. With regard to import duty, at the early stage of our discussion, we had already said that the monitoring is quite costly. So we want to tackle the fee charging when the REEs are already in Hong Kong. But we can make reference to the reports made to the Customs and Excise. But we know that those numbers may not tally. Therefore, we would mainly rely on 39, as mentioned by the Chairman, that we go for the annual audit report, and we can also do inspections and random checking to make sure that no one can evade the recycling fee paying. This will be done by practicing accountants, and they will do the audit. I think this is another layer of protection because we are helped by professionals. But the Customs and Excise numbers and also the sales figures in the market, those will be collected to us so that we know whether anyone is evading the paying of the recycling fee. Mr. Wu, please be very brief. Well, yes. What if people are in default? If they do not pay the recycling fee, will it be that they will be blacklisted once they are in default? In other words, they will not get the labels as a supplied or as a registered supplier. No. Under 40, we have other ways and means to recover the unpaid fees. We will not stop somebody from carrying on their business just because they do not pay the recycling fee, because the impact will be too big. As I said, we can use civil means to recover the fees, and also we will assess how big the fee is that is evaded. Is there a time limit? After we have issued the notices, they will have to pay up within a number of days. Okay, I think we will be talking about the operational details later, but I think time is almost up today, Ms. Sit Ho.
I don't think Mr. Lai's answer is detailed enough. If your effort to verify figures with Customs and Excise and the assessment is not thorough, then no wonder you ask them to purchase the label at full cost. And if it's properly done, then you only have to charge them, say, $5 administration fees. Can Mr. Lai elaborate in his information paper? Well, time is up. Next meeting will take place on the 7th of July 2015 at 10:45 in the morning. There being no other business, meeting adjourned. Thank you.